Thank you for tuning in once again to his Vine and Victory podcast. My name is Kurt Olson. I'm your host. I'm coming to you on the afternoon of October 29th, 2025. We are rushing headlong toward the classic holiday season between Thanksgiving and Christmas, and that'll be fast upon us. But we are now a week, less than a week before the election this year in 2025 on November 4th. And this is unique because we're in between president and midterm, which would be 2026. And this is a year where we have two states that have statewide offices up in both New Jersey and Virginia. Uh, New Jersey, a classic blue state in the mid Atlantic, a classic, very left wing state over time. And the race for governor there is between Democrat Mikey Sherrill and Republican Jack Ciattarelli. There has been some indications of a tightening of the race, even though Sherrill appears to have some advantage, at least um, mathematically on paper. And with New Jersey being a long-standing, fairly navy blue state, I would expect that again. But some people are watching that to see if New Jersey becomes um, what some would argue is purple state, a combination of blue and red. So we'll see something. We'll see if that bears out on election day in the Garden State. And then in Virginia, you have a Democrat sitting member of Congress, Abigail Spanberger, running against the current lieutenant governor. The governor, Glenn Youngkin, is term limited out. So Winsome Earl Sears is running for election as governor. And there are other state races on the ballot in those states and statewide offices and other things as well. But those are getting attention. And in Virginia specifically, one of the things that has been getting attention is the cultural issue of boys play in girls' safe spaces. Virginia has some school districts, Loudoun County specifically, um, and one or two others that have been pretty aggressive in this allowing boys in girls' spaces. Loudoun County Schools has had some girls do some protesting recently, and that has been an issue in the governor's race there. The other issue has been, especially with the political assassination of Charlie Kirk, comments by Democrat Attorney General candidate Jay Jones, who said some pretty, frankly, disgusting and vile things directed at the Virginia House Speaker and his children. And just things that unfortunately are popping up in our politics. And meanwhile, we also have the race for New York City mayor this year. And we have three people running. There were four at one time. Eric Adams, the current mayor, wanted to be reelected. Well, Democrats didn't want him, and he had to run as an independent. So then you had former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who, of course, left office in disgrace during COVID um, because of sexual. I don't. There were numerous stories related to sexual activity involving the former governor of New York, and it exploded, got a lot bigger than certainly he wanted it to be, and forced him out of office. He's trying to resurrect his political career as a mayor of New York City, and but the Democrats put Zoran Mamdani as the top candidate. Um, Cuomo is still in the race, and then the Republican there is Curtis Sliwa. And Zoran Mamdani, it's hard to call him anything but a Muslim communist, period. And there are already signs of serious blowback if he is elected mayor. There's talk of New York City police officers leaving the force. There is talk of businesses that were thinking of doing certain things in New York City leaving the city. So the election of a Muslim communist um, will prove very interesting. And it's all but certain right now, with polling basically, very strong for him, that New York City appears to be heading in this direction. Now, this creates some interesting dynamics here because Hakeem Jeffries is the minority leader of House Democrats in Washington, D.C. He's also a congressman from the New York City area, and he has voiced support for Mamdani. So you have House Speaker Mike Johnson in D.C. basically marrying Hakeem Jeffries to Zoran Mamdani, and basically making the argument that the Democratic Party that we knew is dead, and this is the direction that they're taking. And I mean, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio Cortez, AOC, she jumped on the Mamdani bandwagon really early, and this poses some very interesting issues for Democrats because they really don't understand Islam. Because if Mamdani really wanted to bring a strong Islamic leadership into the city of New York, you would see probably morality police walking the streets with women being demanded all kinds of things. That's something she doesn't understand about Islam. And the other thing that's not understood about Islam is people who brag about being, like queers for Palestine. They don't understand how Islam views homosexuality, because if you're in a Islamic country and you're brought out as a homosexual, you're probably flying off a roof without a parachute, and you're falling to your death, because that's how they do that. So there are some interesting things politically that are going on just in the New York City mayor's race. And it will be interesting how all of that plays out. Meanwhile, there's news that came out today that Elise Stefanik has a lead over Kathy Hochul. Um, Now, that lead is 43-42, which basically leaves it in the, you know, um, a statistical dead heat, um, and a mathematical dead heat. But Elise Stefanik hasn't even announced her candidacy for governor of New York for next year. And for this race to be looking like that this early, there's got to be Democrats that are quaking over what could be thrust upon them. Um, Now, the Democrats over time in the state of New York have crafted this working families party, which is basically a cover for socialism, period. Call it what it is, socialism. And that group has been fairly aggressive in the state and turning out left wing voters. So, and that's one of the things that is credited with putting Hochul past Lee Zeldin 4 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see if that kind of thing um, manifests itself next year. Elise Stefanik is a way upstate congresswoman. She's very close to President Trump. Um, she was his UN ambassador nominee early on until the numbers in the US House became so razor thin, they couldn't stand someone being picked off in the House because there was talk that they weren't going to fill the seat and let things play out with this election. So Elise Stefanik's nomination was pulled. She withdrew herself, and Hochul and Stefanik have been going at each other off and on for some time now, and it's all but certain that Stefanik is going to run for governor against Kathy Hochul. Kathy Hochul, she of um, some serious pay-to-play scandals. She of um, the tyranny that brought you will get your COVID vaccine or it's your job mandate here in this state for a variety of workers. And she of, oh, has never seen a gun control idea she didn't like, never seen a new climate change idea that shouldn't be just adored and turned into public policy. And meanwhile, Governor Hochul here in the state of New York has both Republicans in the state legislature and moderate Democrats in the state legislature. And I didn't know those were even a thing here in the state of New York. But we have learned that there are at least some. They're pleading with her to not implement her green energy plan beginning January 1st, which is any building in the state 6 feet or 6 stories and lower has to be all electric. They already have an electric vehicle mandate. They already have an electric bus mandate. And there are school districts that are either passing on that or because and not taking any money from the state. But there are public officials in this state that are pleading, please do not disrupt our electric grid. The harsh reality is the electric grid is not prepared for all of this electric stuff. It's not. And the other dynamic here that very few are talking about is the data centers, AI. AI is a very critical thing with energy use. And some of these AI projects and data centers are popping up all over the country, and they use a lot of electricity. And to add those data centers, plus the demand for green energy, there's no there. And I hope we don't have a situation during a cold spell in the state where there's rolling blackouts. Because if that happens, there's going to be angry citizens that take their anger out on politicians who have thrust this upon them. So, those are some of the dynamics that are playing into this election and at least next year's governor's race here in the state of New York. Now, in the early afternoon here, I came across a story that talked about evangelicals leaving MAGA. Now, I don't know how much of a thing this is, um, because if it's written by a left of center journalist, and is it the truth? Is it the relentless pursuit of the truth, or is it just attempting to create a headline when there's nothing really there? But the story is that compared to the turnout last election a year ago for President Trump, both white evangelicals or support among white evangelicals and Latino Protestants is down from 1 year ago. And that because of some of his rhetoric on immigration and some other things, these people are, there are people inside right of center conservative churches in this country that are leaving MAGA. So for me, I'll believe that when I see it. But supposedly that's a thing. I'll leave a link that people can read and people can judge for themselves. But the last thing I wanted to share with you here today, and this is also related to faith and politics, is a story I came across yesterday. So I go to work, come home, eat, shower. I'm kind of settling in, doing some things, working on my column for next week, and I see something that are conservatives the new snowflakes? This was a headline with the Free Press. Now, the Free Press is getting a little attention recently because it was bought by Paramount, and its editor, Barry Weiss, is now the person in charge of CBS News and making some decisions that involve some hirings and firings, and the story is she's positioning CBS News to be able to take on Fox News. So there's that. But this was a story in the Free Press. Are conservatives the new snowflakes? And snowflakes would be this very derogatory and mocking term used to of people on the left who feel they have to cancel people, and people who are need their safe spaces and all this other stuff. And I'm like going, I've got to read this because I regard myself as a conservative, and there's no way on God's green earth I regard myself as a snowflake. So I read this, and I'm going to link that story in the description to this podcast as well, and you can read this for yourself. But so this author is basically making the case that conservatives are the new snowflakes. And the evidence he cites is some of the stuff that happened following the Charlie Kirk assassination, with people being canceled, and people losing their jobs, and demands that these people lose their jobs. Well, I didn't do any demanding that people lose their jobs. People are allowed to be stupid. People are allowed to be vile. People are allowed to engage in disgusting and repugnant rhetoric, and celebrating the death of someone would certainly land in that territory. And you're allowed to be an absolute flaming jerk. But I would argue those people that talk like that and celebrate that kind of activity, just because we have social media doesn't mean we need to give them attention. And ignore these people for the worthless ideas that they have, and the disgusting celebration that they're engaging in. And then that kind of rolls over into the Jimmy Kimmel story. Okay, Jimmy Kimmel, late night comedian, late night television on ABC, and he made a joke about Charlie Kirk. Right after that, he was suspended for a week. He's back on TV. Well, Jimmy Kimmel should be canceled, not because of his ideas, but because he's no longer funny. Funny late night television was Jimmy Carson and Jay Leno and David Letterman before he became a flaming left wing lunatic. When he was doing stupid human tricks and these top 10 lists that were actually funny. But That's when late night television was funny. It's not funny with Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. And Jimmy Kimmel shouldn't be canceled because of what he said. He should be canceled because he doesn't no longer makes them pays the bills. That's what happened to Stephen Colbert. He was losing $40 million to the network, and it couldn't be tolerated anymore. And then his last example is Elon Musk. Elon Musk, you know, he he uh he buys Twitter, opens it up to a free exchange of ideas, and then Mark Zuckerberg announces a competitor to uh, Twitter called Threads, and Elon Musk challenges him to a cage match. And people also cite how inside Elon Musk's businesses that he's very intolerant of people who think who oppose his ideas, that kind of thing. Well, I mean, he does own those businesses, and he can run them any way he wants. Um, but I wouldn't regard Elon Musk as a conservative. In what century does Elon Musk qualify for a conservative? I mean, just because he chose to support Donald Trump last year doesn't make him a conservative, because I don't view Donald Trump a conservative. I mean, so this author, and again, I'm going to link this in the description to the podcast, and so you can check it out yourself. And maybe there's something I'm missing there. But I see these examples and I'm like going, well, that's a bad example because I don't believe that. That's a bad example because I don't believe that. And Elon Musk isn't even a conservative. So who are these? So who are these conservatives that are snowflakes? And so we have had this we've had this battle go on within the MAGA sphere, that they get to capture conservatism and they get to redefine it. And I personally reject that. You do not get to redefine an ideology that I've had for 40 years plus. And just sorry, I'm not letting you do it. And for someone to come along and write some piece based on observations and analysis, and say, um, this example are examples of conservatives being snowflakes. I'm like going, well, I don't believe that. Jimmy Kimmel should be fired because he no longer makes ABC money, and Elon Musk isn't a conservative. So I I not only reject your examples, I reject your definition of conservatism. And so and I think some of this talk of conservatives being snowflakes is also stemming from some of these school board meetings where parents are taking passages of pornographic books from the shelves of school libraries, and just reading passages. And you'll have these board presidents or whoever's in charge of the meeting interrupt that person and say, oh no, you can't speak like that. Well, these are books from the library. All they're doing is reading material from your own library. And I would argue parents who want standards for material that their kids have access to, I would argue that's not an example of being snowflakes, and it's not censorship either. It's called standards. It's called boundaries. It's called the adults acting like adults and understanding what's acceptable for children and what's not. In fact, I can argue that kind of material shouldn't even be tolerated for high school kids. Why should any class have that kind of material as some kind of a discussion topic? Um, and these these videos of parents at school board meetings across this country, it's now legion, and it's getting to the point where for parents that are making the point about boys and girls safe spaces, you have moms that are going to school board meetings. They have like a two-piece swimming suit or just their undergarments on underneath, and they're just stripping in front of the class or in front of the school board meeting. They're making the point. Well, if you're uncomfortable here, what makes you think my daughter is comfortable when a boy does this in the bathroom or the locker room? So that's the issue that's now going on culturally in certain public meetings in our country. And I don't view that as censorship, and I don't view that as conservatives being snowflakes. I view that as parents carrying out standards for their kids. And pornography not shouldn't have open access on the shelves of school libraries. You know, the adults in the school district, the superintendent, all of the assistant superintendents, um, the curriculum leaders, the teachers, the principals, all those people, and the school board, all of them should be adult enough to know this isn't an acceptable community standard for us, and it's not happening. In far too many cases, it's not happening. And that's where some of this stuff is creeping in. And oh, conservatives are snowflakes. Well, you know what? Why don't you actually talk to some conservatives before you assume certain people are when they're not? Because Elon Musk had a Democratic voting record for the longest time up until Donald Trump. Okay, he's espoused some conservative ideals. So, it doesn't make him a conservative. I'm sorry. Conservatism is strong defense, domestic policy that supports families who are just trying to play by the rules. Conservatism it calls for sound tax policy that doesn't drown families and businesses with responsibilities to government, and then a concern about the size, scope, and cost of government. And we don't have nearly enough members of the US House, the US Senate, state legislatures across this country who care about those things in total. So if you're a conservative, if you call yourself a conservative and you're in MAGA, but you don't line up in that territory of conservatism, sorry, I wouldn't call you one. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. This has been my political philosophy and ideology for 40 plus years, and I'm not going to let some two-bit journalist at the Free Press think he knows what he's talking about when he doesn't. So a lot of those things this week are very political in relationship, um, um, and that's all I have this week. Um, we might do a little post-election analysis next week, a little bit, but jump to some other big issues that are going on, some things in the economy, and some other things that are pretty big deals. So, dropping another column on Sunday. For those who watch this podcast and read my column, I thank you. And again, this podcast is about liberty and freedom. This name that is used three times in the Old Testament, and that Os Guinness used as a title for his book, or used as kind of substance in a book that he wrote a few years back. It's just This is liberty and freedom is just one of the things that will help make America great again, along with a return to God, the Bible, other things. That's what will make America great again. Make America biblical again. Make America Christian again. Make America, no longer post-Christian. So that's all I have this week. Um, hope folks are doing well. And until next time, God bless and goodbye.